Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio, Sinoland, and cloudy, cool Normandy, France, on the D-Day beaches. I'm pointing right out this window here. About 150 meters away are the beaches where the Allied forces landed on June 6, 1944. If you have not read my article, go back 3 or 4 articles to the one called Dirty Dark Secrets of D-Day, an extremely revealing article that really gets behind all of the propaganda about World War II and explains the truth. Today, we're going to take a little bit different tact. Why are Western leaders god-awful bad and China's so darn competent? Part 1. With a picture of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump up top. Is it the Beavis and Butt-Head Show, or is it the Butt-Head and Beavis? Does it really matter? They, like all Western political leaders, are suborned from the get-go by global capitalist 1% elites. Every time I come back to the West, this time in France, comparing your Anglo land in China just slaps me in the face. Getting to talk to many European citizens about life here and their impressions of Sinoland. We'll first talk about Western governance and leadership. Part 2, I'll compare it to China's. Following how Boris Johnson got, quote, elected, end of quote, Britain's newest prime minister was surreal to say the least. Just as I can tell, the citizens were not even involved. It was all done behind closed doors among Conservative Party cronies, with all the corrupt wheeling and dealing you can imagine. It reminded me just how undemocratic their parliamentary system can be, the people voting as much for a political party as a person. With Donald Trump, we now have on the global stage a real-life Beavis and Butt-Head duo to laugh at and mock. It's shockingly humiliating that two of the West's most representative, quote, democracies, end of quote, can actually be led by a former reality TV star and slumlord billionaire, Trump, with another megalomaniac, media-hungry former TV host who loves to be an outrageous buffoon in front of the camera, Johnson. These two carnival-barking clowns are what passes for, quote, global leadership. Can't stop laughing while I write. Not that other Western, quote, democracies are any better. France's two to the final round system assures that no one threatening the entrenched capitalist order can be elected. Emmanuel Macron is another Wall Street whore, an anti-99% austerity Trojan horse like Francois Hollande, and I can't believe I voted for that deep state Manchurian son of a bankster. His campaign was bankrolled by the American billionaire Henry Kravitz, talking about, of course, Macron. Thus, my wife and I voted for the far-left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, in the first round of the last presidential election. Mélenchon got really close, but in the second round, we were left with, quote, destroy the French working middle class, end of quote, Macron, and the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, actually has a very progressive social agenda. So to do anything to keep Manchurian Macron from getting elected, voted for Le Pen. We are not the only people who voted the same, quote, anybody but Macron way, as we have talked to French friends who did the same thing. How democratic is a system where you are forced to vote from one political extreme to another to avoid a neoliberal train wreck who is hell-bent on making working-class people suffer even more than they did during the totally corrupt previous, quote, socialist, end of quote, Hollande administration, who's nothing but a Washington slut? Is this what our supposedly, quote, superior, noble Western democracy, end of quote, has to offer? Is a, quote, shining white temple on the hill, end of quote, the rest of the world to emulate? Boris Johnson replaced feckless Theresa May, who was a human jellyfish. Before her and going back in time, the world suffered David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, John Major, and Margaret Thatcher. Every one of them wealthy elites who worked overtime to serve the interests of the Fortune 500 and Western global empire, totally subservient to Eddie Yankee. All during this time, working and middle-class British folk got the shaft buried deeper and deeper into their backsides. What kind of future do their children have? It's bleak to say the least. The UK's wonderful national health insurance is being turned into a sausage factory. Students have unpayable university loans, lots of subsistence-level training jobs, and low-pay temporary contracts. Do you really want me to catalog U.S. leadership? Before Trump, we had the quintessential CIA puppet, Barack Obama. I totally exposed his and his family's deep state allegiance in the China trilogy, see below. Other than his half-black skin color, speaking skills, and pushing for gay marriage, his administration was indistinguishable from his predecessors. The idiot, always pulled from the jaws of failure, George W. Bush. Before intelligence challenged W, we had pedophile Billy Clinton, who made several trips to Jeffrey Epstein's Rape a Minor Lolita Island. Billy Boy carried water for the banksters in Wall Street like a firefighter overdosed on crack. At least we knew Bushy Boy's father was a CIA White House plant, having been the spy agency's director before. Ronald Reagan was a grade B Hollywood actor who made millions promoting hatred of communism and was probably suffering from dementia during his later years in the White House. Deep State tried to assassinate him for making peace with those Ruskies, so give him credit for that. Jimmy Carter was vilified for thinking past the 24-hour news cycle by talking to the people about capitalism forbid, conservation, and learning to live with less. Off with his head. He's been vilified ever since, just like Bush 41 for passing the American Disability Act. If those gimps and retards can't walk into a building, too fucking bad, as every true capitalist will tell you. We're close friends in France, and the husband has had a managerial post for 20 years with a big U.S. oil company. He is shocked about how cruel and inhumane is the attitude of every stateside visitor who comes to work here. There are many of them, older, younger, men and women. Their contempt and disgust for their country's fellow citizens who are poor or sick is always manifest, as is their hatred for that, or quote, that black president, end of quote. While France is being neoliberalized into poverty for the middle and working classes, most of the citizens here still have a strong sense of solidarity, ideal that fellow citizens should help those in need. I can go on and on back in time. Gerald Ford had the IQ and finesse of W, sort of a temporary duty Theresa May. Richard Nixon was a delusional megalomaniac, likely addicted to Delanton, and got kicked out of office by the deep state for wanting to end the profit-spending genocide in Southeast Asia. This after he and Henry Kissinger led the extermination of millions of innocents in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. When asked why he was resigning, Nixon famously told the truth about Western, quote, democracy, end of quote, saying, "I don't want to go out like Jack," knowing that John F. Kennedy was assassinated by his own government, fighting the 1% elites. In the China trilogy, I wrote about Obama admitting the same lament. Nixon's predecessor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, leveled the socioeconomic playing field, pushing through his Great Society, voting and civil rights legislation, thank you, but sold his soul to the devil by playing a key role in the murder of JFK. Believe me, William Pepper has sworn affidavits proving the case. No wonder LBJ died a broken man with a double guilty conscience for palace high crimes and sending millions of U.S. and Vietnamese citizens to their early graves. The last U.S. president who actually tried to be presidential was John F. Kennedy. He paid a heavy price for standing up to America's capitalist owners. He got his brains very publicly blown out all over Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. President Dwight Eisenhower could see that the military-industrial legislative complex Already an octopus, vampire, squid in control of the government and economy, but like every other president before and after him, was powerless to tame this ever-growing, insatiable capitalist monster. His presidential farewell warning speech fell on national deaf ears. Before Ike, there was poor Harry Truman, the only non-millionaire to be U.S. president, going back to at least the beginning of the 20th century. He was much, much worse than the UK's Theresa May, as he was warm, putty in the conniving paws of the CIA, NSA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, having signed the law to create these agencies of death. Truman also oversaw the racist incineration of millions of, quote, yellow niggers, end of quote, in Japan and Korea. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was surely the United States' greatest president, and since he worked for the 99% at the expense of the 1%, was very probably poisoned to death. After the failed fascist Wall Street coup d'etat against him in 1933. W's grandpa, Hitler and Nazi-loving Joseph Bush, was one of the main culprits in that plot. Once the elites got socialist Vice President Henry Wallace deposed and replaced by jellyfish Truman, Roosevelt's days were numbered. Starting with Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, every U.S. president who has been against the big private bankers and or the capitalist imperial Wehrmacht was killed, attempted to be killed, or officially died in office, as well as Nixon being ran out of office. This startling statistic is glaring among Western, quote, democracies. British leadership has not been much better, although white supremacist, genocidal Winston Churchill was the man of the hour during World War II. We can ignore tens of millions of mostly dark-skinned colonial subjects who were exterminated like rats in the Crown colonies. France had a truly great leader in Charles de Gaulle, who summed up what almost never happens among Western leaders. He said, in order to become the master, the politician acts as the servant. And de Gaulle also said, the final word is the people's. What the people wish is the duty of the leader. That's exactly how he governed. No wonder the CIA tried to assassinate de Gaulle 6 times. Serving the 99% at the expense of the socialist-hating, warmongering 1%, a capitalist crime punishable by death. Just ask JFK. CIA even tried to turn France into a dollar-denominated puppet state because they knew de Gaulle represented the interests of the people, not the bankster war machine. François Mitterrand on the left and Jacques Chirac on the right paid attention to the common French folks' concerns, but the total takeover of French governance by American elites was a fait accompli with the election of the, quote, I want to be the French Kennedy/Reagan, end of quote, Nicolas Sarkozy, whose father was a known CIA agent. Like father, like son. Hollande, now Macron, have shown just how low French, quote, democracy can sink. These latter two should be tried and hung for treason as agents in service to U.S. elites, along with Sarkozy. So it goes in Western democracy. To understand your Anglo-land's governance, you just have to ask the simple question, do the leaders and legislators honestly represent the interests of the 99% or the 1%? Way past all the identity politics, race baiting, fear-mongering, false flags, wars. Going back centuries, the answer is obvious. Western governments almost always work for the benefit of the wealthy elites at the expense of poor, working, and middle classes. It looks like the capitalist war party may lose control, like with the Great Depression and in post-war Europe. Our owners give us just enough table scraps to nip any revolution for economic and social justice in the bud. Why did your Anglo-landers get Social Security, the 40-hour work week, overtime pay, paid sick and vacation leave, and labor unions, which were briefly given a seat at the table of establishment power? Because of the genuine popularity of communism and socialism among the broad section of the populations. Why did Europeans get much better benefits like universal health care, unemployment benefits, and subsidized child care? Because post-war countries like the UK, France, and Italy had communist and socialist parties that were winning elections. Populist movements and parties were already demonized and destroyed in the U.S. by the end of World War II, with the 50s McCarthyite witch hunts in the capitalist war parties icing on the cake. This is not a modern phenomenon. Every civilization has had to choose whether to support the interests of the rich or the masses. Most have and continue to slavishly work for the 1%. Using limitless financial resources, elites slowly co-opt all branches and levels of government, using the usual imperial toolbox, which is bribery, blackmail, extortion, false flags, and when all else fails, assassination. In their private writings and conversations, U.S. presidents going back to George Washington all lamented how 1% made being truly presidential possible. And every elected official, judge, and cop have had to and must continue to serve the elite's demands first, second, and third. Then maybe the needs of the 99% might be taken into consideration, not for long if it threatens their profits, which is why all those post-war benefits are being clawed back across Euranglo land under the banner of neoliberal austerity. The vast majority of the 4,000-year-old Mesopotamian King Hammurabi's code concerns protecting the land and chattel property interests of the elites. Emperor Nero pulled off one of the earliest known false flags, burning down 1/4 of his own city. Jesus Christ was killed for attacking wealthy bankers, and these latter pushed the Roman government to do their dirty work, to make an official example of him. Julius Caesar was not assassinated for being a dictatorial tyrant. He was murdered by his peers because he was mandating laws to redistribute land and social wealth to the poor and farmers. He was threatening the riches of the Senate's oligarchic families who, quote, governed, end of quote, Rome like a criminal enterprise. In fact, the modern mafia families we know today in Italy descended from these same, quote, democratic, end of quote, thugs. Nicholas Valentine so graphically lays out this capitalist nexus between Western governments, mainstream media, organized crime, supposed, quote, law enforcement, end of quote, Jesus as banksters, Roman Senate's rich and powerful families who have evolved into today's Wall Street and warmongering military contractors. Business in the West has been going great guns since the Old Testament, and billions of innocent men, women, and children have been slaughtered and enslaved to keep that bottom line fat with genocidal lucre. The only change over time being the evolution of technology has made the elite's resource stranglehold go global, accepting communist, socialist, anti-imperialist countries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Bolivia, Syria, and on and on. So there you have it. It's painful to accept that Western democracy is a giant fig leaf, an illusion hiding government-sponsored organized crime, and an ersatz, quote, free press, end of quote. Our politicians can't do the right thing, not really be leaders of the 99% because they are suborned to the dictates of the wealthy 1% elites. That is why Euranglo land almost always gets mediocre to bad leaders and very corrupt governments. 1% wants all those seats of supposed power filled with minions who can be bribed, blackmailed, extorted. If that doesn't work, like Lincoln, Roosevelt, JFK, and others, they just kill them to resolve their belligerence. In part 2, we'll compare and contrast Western governance with China's. This is Jeff J. Brown signing out for China Rising Radio Sinoland in beautiful Normandy, France. Bye-bye.